Next October, around Halloween, when you drive up to the town of Salem and enjoy the macabre festival that is centered around the Salem witch trials back in the colonial era, don't forget to thank the fungus that's named Claviceps purpurea. It's thought to be responsible for the witch trials. It produces ergot, which is a poison that infects grains. And it's thought to have caused the hallucinations that some of the townspeople experienced as demonic possession and the strange behavior of the people who were condemned as witches. Currently, there are medical uses of the ergotamine compounds produced by this fungus, and they're used in the treatment of migraines and to control bleeding during childbirth. One thing you might consider is the question, why is it that ergot, which is a parasite of grains like wheat, why is it that it produces an animal toxin? The fungi are one of the three multicellular groups of eukaryotes that we're going to cover for the remainder of this course. One thing is true about all fungi is that they do not produce their own food. They are all heterotrophs, which means they need to get their carbon and their energy from other organisms. Many of the fungi are decomposers, in fact, probably most. There are, however, a tremendous number of fungi that live as mutualists, and there are quite a few that live as parasites, that is, they exploit other organisms. As I mentioned, they're all eukaryotes. They're all multicellular, or most of them rather, are multicellular organisms. There are some unicellular fungi. And one of the interesting features of them is that the cell wall is back. Remember, the cell wall is a rigid structure around the outside of a cell. In the case of the fungi, it's not made from peptidoglycan, which is the substance that's used to make bacterial cell walls. Instead, it's made of a different polysaccharide called chitin. Fungi are extremely important to human beings in a lot of different ways. Perhaps most importantly, they are very frequently found in mutualistic associations with plants. Most of the important ecological associations that fungi have are with plant species rather than animals. But in a tremendous number of plant species, fungi play a very important role in obtaining nutrients for land plants. These fungi are called mycorrhizal fungi. Myco means fungus, rhiza refers to a root, and these fungi live closely around, or even sometimes within, plant roots. In a way, they act as extensions of the plant roots into the soil, and as they absorb nutrients, they pass those along to the plant, helping the plant to grow. We'll be talking about these in more detail later in this lecture. Additionally, saprophytic fungi, that is, fungi that live as decomposers, are very important in carbon cycling because they break down a lot of the biomass that is generated, especially by producers. In this way, they speed the carbon cycle along. In fact, if fungi were not present, there'd be a tremendous amount of biomass simply trapped in the form of wood in the soil layer in terrestrial areas. Terrestrial environments would become much less productive because the nutrients that are locked up in that dead plant matter would also not be recycled. Sorry about this image. But fungi are also sometimes important sources of disease. Not the most severe diseases generally. We're talking about things like athlete's foot or thrush or this thing, which is called a ringworm. It's actually a fungus, not a worm. But they do act as parasites on human beings, and at least a little bit of our medical budget every year goes into finding ways to defeat these parasites. On the plus side of the ledger, as far as medical things go, fungi are a source of a number of different antibiotics. In fact, the first and most famous antibiotic, penicillin, is derived from a bread mold. The reason that fungi have come up with these compounds, the reason that these compounds have evolved in fungi, is that fungi frequently compete with bacteria for food. Both of these groups of organisms contain a lot of decomposers, and one of the ways to not have to compete with another organism is to kill it. So fungi have evolved a number of different, very effective chemical compounds for killing bacteria. Back on the negative side of the ledger again, though, I mentioned that fungi have a lot of close associations with plants. As well as helping plants, fungi also often kill them. There are millions of dollars worth of crop damage every year due to fungal pests attacking plants that we depend on for food. In addition, fungi have transformed the forests of the eastern United States. You can't see this when you walk out in the woods because obviously you don't see what's missing. But there used to be a tremendous number of chestnut trees in the eastern forest, some of them very, very large. They're all gone now because of an imported fungus called chestnut blight. Dutch elm disease is another fungal pathogen that was imported from elsewhere. It's an invasive species that has transformed not only the forest, but a lot of our cities. Elms are widely planted as ornamental trees, and you can see the difference on this street between what it looked like before Dutch elm disease and after. There are both unicellular and multicellular fungi. Yeasts are the single-celled fungi, and they are used in a lot of our cooking. They're used to make bread dough rise. They're used to make beer. The fermentation process associated with their feeding is very helpful for us in generating a lot of our food products. They're also very important as a model organism. Because they are eukaryotes, and they're very, very easy to grow and propagate in the laboratory, yeasts have been used as a model organism for a lot of the processes that are common amongst all eukaryotes, like say the cell cycle. The multicellular fungi are probably actually one of the multicellular organisms that you are least familiar with. When you think of fungi, you probably think of things like mushrooms and toadstools. And these are very visible, but they're in fact only a very, very small part of a fungus's body. They are actually only the reproductive structures. Most of the fungus's body is very hard to notice because it's usually underground or distributed through whatever food that fungus is decomposing. It doesn't have a compact identifiable body. Instead, what the body of a fungus is this web-like set of threads, these microscopic threads called hyphae. Together, all of those threads are called a mycelium. The plural of mycelium is mycelia. So here what the hyphae look like, the individual threads. Hypha is the plural, or sorry, hypha is the singular form, hyphae are the plural. In the soil, these are all spread out so that when you dig up soil, you barely notice they're there, if you notice at all. They're compacted together to form things like mushrooms and toadstools. These mycelia are pretty strange at the cellular level. It's very, very difficult to tell where an individual fungus ends and the next one begins because it consists of this very fine web of threads. It's only recently, since the advent of molecular methods, that researchers have been able to figure out what the extent of a single fungal mycelium may be. The world record, probably, for the largest single organism on Earth belongs to a fungus that is spread out through the ground in a national forest in eastern Oregon. It's spread out over maybe 10 square kilometers, which is about the area of 1,600 football fields. If you could weigh up all of its hyphae together, which is an impossible task, It would probably weigh hundreds of tons, and this individual organism is probably over 2,000 years old. If you were to zoom in really closely on one of these fine threads, you'd find something very strange. This is actually a cross-section of one of these threads, and to see how small this is a single micrometer, a millionth of a meter right here. What we're looking at is the butt end of one cell and the start of another cell. You can see the cell walls on the outside of the hypha, which is a single cell thick, and this is the wall between the two cells. Oddly, there are pores in the middle of these cells, meaning the cytoplasm of one cell is not completely separated from the cytoplasm of the next. This septum is not what is called a complete wall. Fungi are kind of loose and casual about separating their cells from one another. Not only can cytoplasm flow through these pores, but organelles can, and sometimes even the nuclei of these cells wander around from one cell to another. In some fungi, in fact, there are no septa separating individual cells. It's as though the hypha is all one big cell with lots and lots and lots of nuclei. Because the hyphae of a fungus are extremely, extremely fine, again, they're only a single cell thick, the mycelium, even though it may weigh hundreds of tons, has an extremely high surface area to volume ratio. It has a surface area to volume ratio that is nearly as high as an individual microscopic cell would have. What this means is that the mycelium can be very, very large in terms of total mass without having transport problems. Diffusion, again, mentioned this before, but diffusion really only works as a transport mechanism over extremely short distances. But a fungus is capable of getting all of its gases that it needs in and the waste products that it needs to get rid of out without having special transport mechanisms, because the outside of the body is always maybe a couple of micrometers away. These cells the hyphae are very, very thin, and so no part of any cell is more than a few micrometers away from the surface. One of the vital advantages that this gives to a fungus is that it allows fungi to absorb material from the environment extremely efficiently. All material, of course, that is absorbed into a cell has to be absorbed through a surface. And the fact that a fungus has so much surface area makes it an exquisitely good absorber. This is the single trait that is most important to the way that a fungus makes its living. However, it also puts some very strong limits on where a fungus can live. And what I'd like you to do is think about why the surface area to volume ratio limits where a fungus can be found and where fungi should be limited to based on that very high surface area to volume ratio.